Hello, Namaskar, Adab. I welcome you all on behalf of Mahindra Sanatkada Lucknow Festival at this Begum Iqtidar Ali literary and Guftgu stage. So we are going to have a very interesting session of Ishq and Itr. अभी महिंद्रा सनतकदा फेस्टिवल का कल का दिन बड़ा डैम्पन हुआ बारिश की वजह से, लेकिन शाबाशी देता हूँ टीम सनतकदा को कि उन लोगों ने फिर वापस इसको उसी तरह खूबसूरत बना दिया जैसे पहले दिन था। महिंद्रा सनतकदा फेस्टिवल पिछले 15 सालों से ये इसका 15th एडिशन है। जब से ये शुरू हुआ है तब से कोई ना कोई थीम लेके चला है। कभी लखनऊ की रिहाइशों की थीम होती है, कभी लखनऊ के खानों की थीम होती है, यहाँ की आर्ट की, यहाँ की म्यूज़िक की। तो इस बार इस फेस्टिवल की थीम है आशिकाना लखनऊ। अगर देखा जाए तो फ्रेग्रेंसेस की जो हिस्ट्री है, जब से मैनकाइंड का एवोल्यूशन हुआ है, खुशबुएं, फ्रेग्रेंस ये धीमे धीमे अपनी जगह लेती गईं। और शुरुआती दौर में या अभी भी ये नेचर से जो चीज़ें आती थी, नेचर की जो एलिमेंट्स थे, चाहे वो फूल हों, चाहे वो फल हों, लकड़ियाँ हों, इवन पानी की भी खुशबू का इस्तेमाल किया गया। और जैसे कि आप लोगों को, बहुत लोगों को पता होगा कि बहुत सी लकड़ियाँ होती हैं जिनकी खुशबू, जैसे ऊद है, चंदन है, उनका इस्तेमाल करके उन खुशबुओं को क्रिएट किया गया। और खुशबुओं को इसलिए क्रिएट किया गया क्योंकि इंसान ने पहचान लिया था कि खुशबुओं का एक इम्पैक्ट होता है। वो इम्पैक्ट उनको, उनके एक्सप्रेशंस को, एक एटमॉस्फेयर को, उसको एनलाइटन करती है और एक अलग नोशन देती है उसको। तो इसका सिलसिला जारी रहा और हमारे हिंदुस्तान में इत्र, और बहुत से लोग अत्र कहते हैं और शायद कहते भी होंगे क्योंकि जो लोग इत्र बनाते हैं उनको शायद अत्तार कहते हैं। तो आप जानती होंगी ज़्यादा बेहतर गीती जी। तो इत्र का सिलसिला जारी हुआ और मेरे ख़्याल से इत्र में हर तरह का इस्तेमाल हुआ, इवन स्पाइसेस तक को यूज़ किया गया बनाने के लिए। एक बहुत मशहूर नाम है शमामा, स्पाइसेस से बनता है। तो आज हमारे बीच में we have with us Giti Dutt. She is an anthropologist. She has a PhD in anthropology, and she's a perfumer. And she has last year she has worked all over India, working with wherever the perfume industry is, and she's been tracing the process of this itr right from farmers to distillers and the manufacturers to the retailers, the users, and beyond it. And she has come to a conclusion that we are influenced by a lot of Western impact as far as the usage of fragrances is concerned, especially in itr industry. We try to copy the brands which are not from India. So she is working for indigenization of the fragrances of itr and the processes also. And in conversation with us, with her, we have here Shruti Shandlia. She is a co-founder of Tirva Farms, and she is working for. She is manufacturing organic food, chemical-free, pesticide-free. That's very good, and actually that's the need of the hour. हम लोग को चाहिए है कि अब हम लोग ऐसी खानों की चीज़ें हम लोग तक पहुँचें जो केमिकल फ्री हैं और हार्मफुल नहीं हैं। and she's emphasizing on the methods which are very, very, traditional. So let's start with the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Adab and good evening. And I apologize, I will only be speaking in English. I understand Hindi and Urdu, but I'm not fluent enough to do this talk in any Indian language, so I'll be speaking in English. But first, actually, to your point, is it itr, is it ittar, is it attar? Actually, all of these are all of these terms are used in India. Depending on who you talk to, which region you go to, how much involved somebody is or is not in the industry, people will use a different term. Itr comes from the Arabic, attar comes from the Persian. And you're right, the medicine people were called attars. And they also used attar in medicine. So all of these terms are used, but I tend to say attar. So as you mentioned, I'm doing my PhD in anthropology, and this last year I have been doing my field work. So I've spent the last year visiting all of these different places and learning about this industry. And Lucknow was one of my field sites. From here, I also went to Kannauj a lot, and I also spent a lot of time in Delhi. So I've got 1 month left, and to finish up this year of fieldwork, it is really lovely to come here and share with you some of the things that I found, in what was one of my field sites. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm very much looking forward to this.
Thank you so much, Giti. It's an absolute honor and delight to be talking to you. Before we start the session and you talk about the art and science of attars, I just want to tell you that I've always been very fascinated by attars. And but as Indians, we always sort of took it for granted. Hame lagta tha it's more like our grandparents' thing. But, you being an Australian and, of course, Indian origin, I want to start the session by asking you what was the reason, how did this whole passion towards attars, your first love, second love, whatever. How did this love start, what sparked this passion in you?
Yeah, and thank you for asking this question. I've actually been asked the same thing quite a bit over the last few days. People are always wondering, how did you get into something so niche and why are you spending so much of your time on this subject? So I'll tell you how it started. It was about 10 years ago, maybe a little more than 10 years ago, and I wanted to find a perfume for myself. I had been using the commercial perfumes, the spray-based perfumes, but I didn't so much love them anymore. And I wanted something different. So of course I had seen attars, I had seen these little glass bottles, with these gold caps. And in my mind, I thought, this is something historic, this is something cultural, this will be something with a good story, this will be something unique. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go find an attar for myself. So I went to Old Delhi because I thought, where are you going to find an old thing? You're going to find it in the old part of the city. So I found an old shop in Old Delhi, and I went there. And I don't know if any of you have ever gone to an attar shop, but you kind of have to know what to ask for. It's not exactly nobody really educates you or guides you through the process, and I didn't know anything. But I knew I liked jasmine. I knew I liked motia flowers. So I went in there and I said, do you have any attar that is like motia? And they said, actually, we have motia. So they showed me this perfume. It was called Jasmine Sandbag, and I smelled it, and it was beautiful. And I was like, this is amazing. This is going to be my signature scent. So I started buying this for a few years, and I was using it, and I was loving it. And then, I started to get a little more curious about it. So when I went back a few years later, I said to the shopkeeper, can you tell me more, right? Tell me how it's made. Tell me who makes it. For how many centuries has it been made? Where is it made? Tell me more about this. And he said, ma'am, this is a synthetic compound. This is made in a lab. And I was like, this is so disappointing. I thought this was going to be something incredible, but it wasn't. So I said, do you have anything made from the real motia flower? Yeah. And he said, yes, I do. So he showed me rue motia. Now, rue means soul. So rue motia is soul of jasmine, sorry. So he pulls out this, crystal cut decanter. It has this very dark brown liquid in it with sediments at the bottom, very different to this thing I had been buying, which was this pale gold liquid. And he shows this to me. Now, rue motia, if you've ever smelled it, is pungent, actually. and it's quite sharp. So when you first smell it, it may not even be that nice. But then once you put it on, it mellows and it evolves and it becomes something incredibly beautiful, intoxicating. And I was like, wow, this is something else, you know? So he told me how it was distilled from the from the flowers. I said, what else have you got? He showed me all these different attars. Attar mitti, attar gulab, rue chameli, you know, all of these different attars. And I was like, this is incredible, you know, I want to know more. So the next year I went back, I said, and by the way, this was, like I said, about 10 years ago. So there was nothing available on the internet about it. There were no books. You know, I thought I'd do my own research, but there were no books, there were no documentaries, there were no photographs, there were no videos, nothing. So, I mean, nowadays you have some videos about this distillation, but back then there was nothing. So the next year I went there and I said, can I visit a farm or a distillery? And they facilitated that for me. So I went and I saw the gulab harvest in Hussain. So Hussain is near Hathras, and this is where the damask rose is cultivated and where it's harvested, and it's also distilled there because you have to distill it close to the source. So I left Delhi at 2 a.m. to arrive before dawn. Yeah, and not that you can see it properly, but there is actually an image of a farm if it shows up. You know, so I saw these people picking these flowers by hand before dawn, collecting them in these giant sacks, you know, collecting these mountains of flowers. Then you see these flowers getting transported to the brokers. Then the brokers transport them to the distillers. And then I sat in the distillery for the rest of the day. And you see the distillers pouring these flowers, you know, into the degs, sealing those up, putting the fuel underneath the kanda, you know, manipulating fire and water, heat, moisture for hours and hours, using nothing but their hands really, to know what needs to be done. And you watch this material being refined into this oil, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I looked into, you know, what is this rose? Why is it being made? Who is buying it? Because this is one of the most expensive attars. So this was now about 8 years ago, and at that time, 10 grams of this rue gulab was retailing for 18,000 rupees. And you're like, who is buying this? Why is anyone still making this? So I looked into the rose. And I learned that this particular rose came to India with Babur. It was very important to the Timurids. It was a culturally important flower. They used it in gardens. They used it to make rose water. Then in Jahangir's reign, and you can read this in Jahangir's autobiography in his own words, he writes about how Nur Jahan's mother, Asmat Begum, is making gulab jal. And as she's making it, she notices this scum rising to the surface. And she touches it. And it's incredibly fragrant because this is the oil. So she collects all of this oil and she presents it to Jahangir. And he smells it and he says, there is no perfume of that, you know, equals the excellence of this perfume. It brings back withered souls and hearts that have gone bad. And a single drop makes you think that 1,000 rosebuds have bloomed. And I'm so sad that my father, Akbar, is not alive to smell this. Wow. And he gifts her, Nur Jahan's mother, a pearl necklace for her invention. And so I was there going, my God, I've seen these flowers being cultivated, harvested, distilled. I've seen this raw material transformed into this oil, and then you think that you're holding in your hand, you know, a bottle of this perfume that Jahangir loved. And this is how my love started. I thought this is an incredible, incredible hidden world that I knew nothing about. So that is what sustained me all these years.
That's really nice to know. So, you know, we use perfumes, and French perfumes are so well known, right? What is so unique about attar? Like, why is attar so unique, you know, compared to all these other perfumes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. And let me first clarify that when I say attar, I'm talking about these attars distilled from natural aromatics. So I'm not talking about the synthetic compounds. Although a lot of people, when they say attar, they mean any of these products, but my research is focused on the natural attar. So that's what I'm talking about. But to answer your question, I mean, the first thing people usually think about is the fact that attar is alcohol-free, right? And that's the obvious answer. Attar does not have alcohol, and it's an oil-based perfume. But beyond that, beyond the obvious, what I would say is, you know, when I meet people or when I have customers who've never smelled attar, one of the things I say to them is that attar is more like wine than it is like a conventional perfume. And what I mean by that is, you know, in the same way that a wine will reflect the soil, the climate, you know, the very particular inputs that that farm or vineyard has used. Every season will be different. This is what attar is like. So you will not have the same smell year after year, and you will not have the same smell whether something is using the rose from this farm or that farm. It will be different, and that's what makes it beautiful. But when you buy a commercial perfume, you want consistency, right? You want it to smell the same every time. So that is a very big difference. But one of the other things I would also talk about is not just attar specifically, but Indian perfumery broadly, right? Because if we're going to talk about attar, I think we have to also talk about perfumery. Because if you're going to talk about the sitar, you have to talk about music. You have to understand the broader art form to understand this particular thing, right? So, and this is something that I have found through my research, so I'll share it with you, right? And these are two things that I would say make Indian perfumery unique and very different to other types of perfumery. So one of the things is that in India, you know, and perfumery has been around for maybe over 2,000 years, I'd say. The early textual evidence comes from the Vedas, right? So it's been around for quite a while. Sorry, 4,000 years, let's say. Perfume is not just an accessory. It is not just a nice smell, which is how many of us think of it today. Perfumes were important in almost every facet of life, right? You had rituals, of course, and perfumes are still important in ritual. If you think of Vedic rituals, we are still using aromatics in that. If you think about the importance of perfume in Islam, I mean, the Prophet himself talks about perfumes. You have jinns, right? So perfume and the divine is very much linked, right? You have jinns love perfumes, right? So if you go to somewhere like Feroz Shah Kotla on a Thursday night, people are going to be putting their petitions. Let me see if this works. This is on the left, actually. So that's Feroz Shah Kotla, right? People will put their petitions and they'll leave a bottle of attar because the jinns are attracted to that. So perfumes were always a bridge between the human and the divine, or the material and the invisible. Perfumes were also very important in health, right? And they still are. So one of the practices that continues, that is an old one, is that you use different aromatics in different seasons. So in terms of attar, if you're thinking of summer, you would use kas and mitti because they cool the body down, so it helps you adapt to your environment. Okay. You'll use shamama or musk in winter because, again, it warms you and helps you adapt to that environment. And then again, Unani medicine also uses a lot of aromatics. You know, there was a whole class of aromatics that were cardiac tonics. So you have health and aromatics that have always been important. And then from there, you know, perfumery became this really complex art and just to be clear, it was an elite art, right? So what I am talking about is very much elite perfumery, because there's not a lot of documentation on other kinds of perfumery, unfortunately. So really what I'm talking about is very elite. But it was a very important facet of elite lives for 2,000 years. You know, so from the Arthashastra, they actually talk about perfumery as being important in statecraft. So it was from the Arthashastra all the way up till maybe the 1700s. Elites were engaged in the art of perfumery. 2 of the 64 kalas were about perfumery. One was the art of making perfume, and the other was the art of using perfume, of applying perfume. This wasn't just something you put on your body, this was something you really thought deeply about, right? It was very complex. And I'll give you a couple of interesting examples. I mean, there are so many, but I'll just give you a couple because they're quite unique. So there was, just recently, I was in Old Delhi, and there's a community library that some of the older residents of Shah Jahanabad have set up. And one of them pulled from his family library this Urdu book that was about the ways in which perfume were used during the Sultanate and Mughal periods. And there's an example where in war, right, you had the camels. And the camels would be pulling an angiti, like a fire pit. Yeah, okay. And they would put aromatics in that fire pit. Specific perfumes were put in that fire pit so that the soldiers who were marching behind would smell that, and it would keep their minds cool and keep them stress-free. So, I mean, perfume was used in war, right? Akbar took his Khushbu Khana to war. He actually set up a temporary one in the camp, right? Which is fascinating. Let me just think. I have other examples. Let me think. There was, yes, okay, so also you had, kings would actually wear perfumed pastes on their forehead. And because of the color of that paste, you could identify what that aromatic was. So in the same way that you might wear jewelry or certain robes to, communicate something to your subjects, people were actually using visual perfumes in that same way. You had, let's see, and also during the last one, during the Mughal period, there's another historian, and she writes about how, this was a period where there was a lot of travel and migration and infusion of different kinds of people into the court. And so people were getting really interested and obsessed with the exotic, ajib or garib, things that were confounding or that would inspire wonder. So it was an important skill for elites in the court to be able to make confusing and confounding perfumes. Because if you could do that, if you could make a perfume where the next person couldn't identify what was in it, then that was a skill that could set you apart at court. So it was a kind of social capital, having the skill to make perfume, actually. So so this is one of the things, that perfumery was integral to many facets of life. And the second thing I would say about Indian perfumery that makes it very unique, and this is in contrast to French perfumery, as you mentioned French perfumery. So with modern French perfumery, when we talk about a scent, right, we often talk about how a perfume smells like something. You'll say, this perfume smells like a warm summer's night. It smells like a childhood at the beach. It smells like a whatever, right? It smells like something. It transports you. So it transports you to another place, to another time, maybe even to another person. A lot of us think about smell and people. So French perfumery is like that. But Indian perfumery, when you look at all of the literature on it, the historical literature, was not about that. It was about transformation. So I'll use the example of music, right? If you think about ragas, ragas capture a mood. They capture, a season or a time of day or an emotion. And what happens when you hear that raga? You're not reminded of something. You are transformed in that moment, right? So perfumes were like that. They would transform you. So these are a couple of the things that I would say are unique about Indian perfumery.
That's so fascinating, right? I mean, transform versus transport.
Yes.
I think that's so fascinating. It's amazing. Well, the theme of the festival is Ishq, Ashikana, right?
Yeah.
And we all want to know what is the correlation between attars and love, right? We all want to know that.
So, there's so much you could say about love and perfume, right? And I think we'll start with the obvious, I guess, which is what a lot of us would think about, which is, that perfumes can obviously be used as aphrodisiacs. They can be used for attraction and desire. And this is a very old thing. So for millennia, actually, perfumes have absolutely been used and recognized for their aphrodisiac qualities, right? Things like musk, ambergris, even some of the very spicy kind of notes are often seen as aphrodisiacs. And actually, there was an example I found in Lucknow when I was doing my fieldwork that kind of reflects this, right? So there was a book I was reading called Awadhi Symphony, which I'm sure many of you have read, by Aslam Mahmood, I think, who was a Lucknow, a significant person in Lucknow and a bibliophile, I believe. So he had a huge collection of books, and a lot of it was on Awadhi culture. So in this book, which is a compendium of this kind of historic culture in Awadh, there was a section on weddings. And it said that the newlyweds would use suhag ka attar on their wedding night. Now, I had never heard of suhag ka attar ever. In all these 10 years, it's not something I'd come across. But I went to one of your old attar shops in Chowk, and I asked around a little bit, and somebody said, actually, we have an old bottle of this. So this is decades and decades old. Nobody is buying it, making it, using it anymore, but they had a bottle.
Wow.
So I bought a bit of it.
Oh, God.
And when you smell it, I'm pretty confident. Musk is now illegal, but I'm pretty confident, because this is an old perfume, that it probably had musk.
Oh.
Yeah, it was very heavy, very dark, very spicy.
What did it smell like?
It was, if anyone knows shamama, it's not entirely different to shamama, but it has much more of a smoky, musky kind of smell to it. It's definitely what I would call heavy, but
Were you drawn to it?
Absolutely.
Oh,
I thought it was lovely.
The trick
the real question is, were others drawn to me when I wore it?
Okay.
You'll have to ask other people.
Okay.
But yeah, I thought it was pretty amazing.
That's
yeah.
cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow. Okay, so this is a very romantic love, right? You talked about. But what about like motherly love or love for your child or divine love? What is the correlation of attar with all that?
So, I mean, motherly love, or let's say familial love, smell. I mean, smell definitely plays an important part. Attar, I guess, depends on the particular person or family, but smell absolutely plays an important part. I mean, many of us would know that the smell of a newborn is a very specific thing that is helpful in bonding, and the smell of a parent and their skin is also very helpful in bonding. But I've also met people, right, quite a few people now, who have bottles of attar that belong to a family member. And they don't use it anymore, but they keep it and they smell it from time to time because it reminds them of somebody, which is quite beautiful. I think smell definitely plays a part in that kind of love.
Yeah.
But in terms of divine love, this one here on the right, this is a photo from a Krishna temple in Old Delhi. So there are temples where actually attar is used in puja, and it's also given as prasad, and this was an example of that. So again, attar actually is very much used as a form of sort of devotion or bhakti.
Wow. No, that's true. There's so many temples where you actually take attar and you offer it to gods. Yeah, that's true. Okay. So, when it comes to French perfumes, there are always categories, right? There are families like oriental, floral, woody. So the same principle, does it apply to attar as well? Or is it a different ball game?
I guess, I guess these days people also use this language.
Yeah.
But I would very much say that this comes from the French perfume tradition. But yes, it has come into India, and it is something that most of us would use this language if we're going to talk about smells, right? Even I used it when I was just talking about Sohaka attar. But historically, no, you didn't actually see perfume described this way. Perfumes were described more for the effect they had, actually, because they were transformative, they were for a purpose. They were classified more according to their effect. But these days, I'd say, yes, we are definitely using this kind of language.
Yeah, like to your point, you mentioned earlier that rose attar, men use, right? So it's not like there's no demarcation between male attar and female attar. Is there anything like that?
Not really. I mean, I've hardly come across it, to be honest. Okay. And this is also something, I guess, unique to Indian perfumery, is that it has always been comparatively genderless, I would say, in terms of the perfume materials. You don't really see specifically that this is a woman's perfume or not. And as you say, I mean, Jahangir, he was the emperor, and he's using rose, which many today would consider to be the most feminine floral out there. But actually, there was nothing like that. Yeah.
So aromatherapies really gain momentum these days, and a lot of people say that it helps to combat depression, elevates mood. What role attar plays in this industry?
I mean, it's an interesting question, because it also relates to, what is the difference between an attar and an essential oil, let's say.
Yeah.
Right? These are both natural aromatics. Yeah. What is the difference, or are they the same thing? And there is no agreed upon categorization. Personally, I would say the difference between an attar and an essential oil is the method of production, which is, the attar is made using these historic techniques, deg bhapka distillation, patila, destructive distillation. These are the different methods used in attar making. And that, I think, is distinguishing. But whether or not attars actually have the same kinds of benefits of essential oils or other naturals, yes, they would. I mean, they are also, containing the volatile organic compounds of plant materials, which is basically what makes aromatherapy effective.
Yeah.
So yes, attars definitely have that kind of effect on one's mood.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I think you also mentioned something like that, like a lot of times when we're feeling a little low, like we were talking the other day, and you mentioned that, just perfume, just it just helps to elevate your mood.
Yeah, and I definitely will choose a different attar depending on what I need in that moment, actually, and I do find that it makes a difference. So I definitely think that there is a role to play.
Great.
Yeah.
So in your research in the last 10 years, Giti, there may be a lot of misconceptions around attar, right?
Yes.
So can you talk about them and debunk them, or
Yes.
clarify those misconceptions for us?
Yes, okay, definitely. So one misconception I come across a lot when I tell people what I'm studying, a lot of people will say to me, attar, that is a very Muslim thing, isn't it? It's a very Muslim practice or a very Muslim perfume, or that industry must be dominated by Muslims. And that is not at all the case. It is a syncretic product, practice, history. And not directly, but in some way I've tried to kind of show that, right? In the sense that attar is used in mandirs, it is also used in dargahs, it is used in all kinds of spaces, actually. And if you look at the industry, if you even look at the people who are involved in making this product, whether we are talking about farms or distilleries or manufacturing businesses or retailing businesses, you will find a mix of people, actually, from different religious backgrounds. So I don't see it that way at all. I think that is a very big misconception, and I think that is maybe a reflection of the way, post-independence, many things have been communalized in ways, but I don't see that to be true at all. And I think it's very useful to debunk that misconception, to show that this is very much a syncretic practice. Let me think, I think I had one other thing, didn't I? What was there?
Like in your talk only, you mentioned that a lot of perfumes people think are for women, essentially. Is that something, did you feel that
true.
during your research?
Yeah, the gendered element. Yeah, that's true. So that is another thing with attar, is that it's not, there is no gendered element to attars. That is definitely a misconception. Actually, here's another one. So a lot of people will say, attar is very strong, right? I don't wear it because it's very strong. And this I find not to be true at all. I think, and I think this comes from the fact that many people unfortunately have not had the opportunity maybe to smell these naturally derived attars that I'm actually talking about. So, at the beginning I said I was asking for an attar and I got a synthetic. Now, after 10 years, I can honestly tell you more than 95% of what you will find in the market is that. It is going to be a synthetic compound, actually. So to find an attar that is actually distilled from a natural aromatic is very challenging. And to find one that has not been adulterated is so challenging, and you'll never really know for sure. So I think a lot of people actually say that because they haven't necessarily smelled all these different attars. Because if you smell something like attar gulab, attar mitti, these are so subtle. These are very mild and subtle attars, and when you wear them, you are wearing them for yourself and you are wearing them for people who are close to you. If I'm wearing it here, you're not going to smell me in the back of the room, but you might. You might. It's a different kind of perfume. Others are strong. Rumotia is strong, right? But not all of them are like that. So that's also a misconception, actually. Yeah.
And also that maybe it's old-fashioned.
Definitely.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that.
Yeah.
When they talk about attar, they'll say, "Oh God, I remember my grandfather putting that cotton ball in his
I
ear."
remember. That's what I used to think. Yeah.
So a lot of people have this idea that attar is something very old-fashioned. And yeah, maybe it was, but I don't think that's entirely true. Again, I think if people smell the variety of attars, of these naturally derived attars, then actually they'll find scents in there that they didn't expect, for sure. I think also, I guess the other point to make is that a majority of attar that is distilled is not actually ending up in the perfume market. It is ending up in the tobacco market. So a majority of attar is used in chewing tobacco, pan, gurkha, and zarda. This is the biggest domestic buyer of attar. Yeah. So a lot of people are actually consuming attar without realizing that they are consuming attar. So in that sense, it's not old-fashioned at all, right?
Yeah. It's touching our lives, like you said.
Yeah, in one way or another.
So also, we all feel that attar is only made in Kannauj, because Kannauj is the perfume capital of the country. Can you talk about that? Because you've done the length and breadth of the country, right? Yeah. So you would know.
Yeah, again, you're so right, and that is, again, a misconception that Kannauj is the only place attar happens, and that's not true at all. So today, yes, Kannauj is definitely the epicenter. But like I said, if you want to see gulab, the damask rose, you have to go to Hussain. If you want to see Kera, you have to go to Orissa. If you want to see oud, you have to go to Assam. So there are some specific regions that are associated with specific aromatics. But beyond this, You know, in this last year, I've actually met a lot of people who had distilleries in different parts of the country, right? So I met other retailers in Mumbai who used to have a distillery in Udaipur, and they used to supply to the royal family there. I met in Lucknow itself, you know, I met a Rajkumar in Lucknow whose family used to distill attar in their palace, actually, under the supervision of the household hakim. So attar distillation, in fact, Delhi itself, you know, there used to be attar distillation in Delhi. Yeah. So attar distillation happened all over the place.
And Hyderabad also, right?
Probably. I don't actually know of specific examples, but I would imagine definitely so, right? So attar distillation happened in a lot of places, actually. It was not something that only happened in Kannauj. And why Kannauj is the epicenter today, how this happened, actually nobody knows the answer to that. What I think, which is, you know, not, I don't have all the concrete evidence for this, but what I think is that, you know, attar was being distilled in a lot of different places. And then in the colonial period, when the attar industry was restructured, when, you know, patronage declined because all the courts they declined, you know, and were diminished. Actually, there was a restructuring of the attar industry. The British encouraged business people to set up attar firms in order to make essential oils, attars, soaps, and incense. So in fact, if you go to an attar shop, you'll often see these are the things they're selling, right, still. And if you look at most of the attar businesses in India today, whether they're manufacturing or retailing, they came up at that time. So I don't know whether Kannauj became the epicenter then, because there was an actual drive to set up an industry. Maybe that is actually when it happened.
Oh, great. So, so one question which comes to my mind is that, you know, most of the top perfume companies in the world, they use attar to make perfumes, right? Including Guerlain. And sometimes we Indians, we need validation from the Western world, you know, to appreciate the gift we inherited. What is your take on that, Giti? And also, along with this, if you can just talk a little bit about how you know, in the last 10 years, how you saw the entire the industry, the landscape of attar industry, how has it evolved? If you can talk about these two.
Yeah. Do we need validation from the West? Maybe. I mean, maybe that has been true. You know, you certainly hear that that's been the case before. It happened with yoga, I guess, meditation. A lot of these things, you know, had to become very popular in the West before they were again re-exported back here. But this is all tied up in colonial history and cultural imperialism, you know, and I think these days people are more aware of that. So we have definitely got movements where people are reclaiming their own heritage, right? With or without Western validation, we are reclaiming our own heritage. So I'm doing this, but I'm not doing this because I saw some white Australian person doing this or whatever, and then I decided I'm also going to, you know, like it's not like that.
Yeah,
you know,
it's a lost, anyways, not many people are aware of attar. Right?
No, exactly. Yeah. But I think there are more and more initiatives, and there is a movement like that, right? There's a whole, and if you look at beauty, I mean, there's a whole movement called ancestral beauty, right? That's what the trend is called. And that is where you get people from different parts of the world who are reclaiming their own heritage, their own practices, and they themselves are turning those into products or businesses or whatever it is. You know, you're not having to wait for a Western company to do it. So maybe that was true. I think it is less true now, definitely. I think social media has helped with that. And I think if you look at even the attar industry today, you will see that a few new brands have come up in the last 3-4 years where they are looking to use attars in contemporary perfumes in new and interesting ways. So this is all happening.
Great.
Yeah.
Giti, what interesting projects are you working on right now? And how, like, you know, if any one of us want to reach out to you to know more about all this, can you just let us know how to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, so the couple of projects aside from my PhD, I guess, that I would mention. One is, like I said, I think maybe in the introduction, but I have a brand in Australia and I do make products using attars. But I will be doing this in India as well. So over the next year, I'm looking to launch a perfume brand in India.
Oh, that's amazing. I think we need to clap.
Thank you very much. Yeah. But the purpose of this is not just to use attar, it is actually to use an Indian approach to perfumery. So you know how I told you before there are a few things that make Indian perfumery distinctive? This is also what I'm looking to do, to actually not use the language of French perfumery or use the models of French perfumery, but actually use the aesthetics of Indian perfumery to make perfumes.
Wow.
And to show people that this can be a beautiful thing. So that is one thing I'm doing.
That brand is called Hava?
Hava.
Oh, wow.
The second thing, which, again, at the beginning I said if you want to learn about perfume or attar and you go and you Google it or whatever, there's not really all that much information. Definitely not much robust information. But there is an edition of Marg magazine that is going to be coming out within the next month, and it is specifically focused on perfume. So this is actually incredibly exciting. And I can share something with you in confidence. This is not for social media. This is the working cover for this. And this is going, so please don't share this on social media or anything like that, but this is going to come out in the next month. If you are interested, please buy this, because you will not find anything like this anywhere else. So yeah, I have an article in this on the contemporary attar industry, but a lot of this will be focused on the history of perfumery.
That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we'll open this floor to the audience if they want to ask some question. I'm sure a lot of them. Yeah.
I have about a dozen questions for you, but I guess I'll just restrict it to two. The first one links to the bit that you spoke about in terms of the transformative aspect of attar. Now, when I transitioned into using attar almost full time and I kind of gave up the Western perfume as I knew it, one of the things I would brag about often is that my attar does not homogenize like the Western perfume. Like if I wear attar, it's going to smell different from the way my sister would smell. I just wanted to clarify if that really is true or I was just humble bragging a little too much.
No, that's legitimate. I think I would agree with you. It absolutely smells different on everybody. Sure. And that's one of the things that I think is very beautiful about it. You know, we could wear the same thing but smell completely different. Yeah.
And the second question I had was to the bigger process of, let's say, decolonizing the whole impact of imperialism on us in terms of how we kind of wear perfume and how we kind of deal with fragrances as such. If we had to support in the decolonization of the art of perfume, how can we really do that as people who like to kind of promote our Indian work as such? So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question and a big question. I mean,
read your PhD for that.
Yeah, God. They say nobody reads your PhD but your examiners, right? Thank you, that's the fourth person who'll read my PhD. But I think, in terms of decolonization, I mean, one of the biggest things is probably in terms of how we talk about perfume. I think that matters a lot. So how we talk about it, what we love about it, how we use it, you know, if we can, like even just being here and talking with all of you, right, and explaining that, no, it's something transformative, or we don't have to use that language, we can use different language, and all of this is legitimate. Because I think perfume suffers from the same kind of thing wine suffers from, which is that there is a right way to talk about it, right? Wine appreciation, you know, like you have to have the language. That's nonsense. You don't have to have that language, and we have a different language. So we should use that language. I think that's actually one of the biggest things, is how we talk about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the session. Well moderated and beautifully presented.
Thank you. I think you have a question, right? Yeah.
Shukriya for this really interesting and illuminating talk about perfumes. I think I haven't heard of some of these things that you shared today ever before. So I just wanted to ask you about this place in Saudi Arabia called Taif, and it seems to have a culture of distilling and making damask rose perfume. Have you been there? Or
no, I haven't, but I'd love to hear more about it. You'll have to tell me.
Yeah, so Taif has, I think...
I've heard of the rose, actually, Taif rose.
Yeah, the Taif rose.
I don't know more about it.
And they cultivate it there, it's grown there, and they process it there, and I'm yet to go there because Saudi, you know, has opened up now to tourists. But I hear that April is the season where they do it, when they do it. So I just wanted to know if it's their process is any different from what they're doing in...
To be honest, I don't know the answer to that, but I have heard that the process you find here is similar to the process you find in Iran. So that is meant to be similar. So maybe that is also where it came from. I don't know. I mean, distillation came to India maybe around the 1200s, this kind of distillation, maybe around the 1200s. Maybe it did come from Iran, I don't know, and maybe it also traveled in the other direction. I mean, the damask rose did travel both east and west, so maybe so did the methods of distillation. Yeah, I don't actually know.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions you have?
Thank you so much. In the Persian literature, in the Persian poetry, especially Sheikh Sadi's Gulistan, starting from a few lines, after that he said, Gile khushbue dar hammam roze, rasid az daste mahbube badastam, badu guftam ke mushki ya abiri, ke buए दिलावेज़े तो मस्तम बगुफ्ता मन गिले नाचीज़ बूदम व लेकिन मुद्दते बागुल नशीनम. In Urdu poetry, Mir Hasan in the Masnavi Sehrul Bayan described these flowers, चमेली कहीं और कहीं मोतिया, कहीं रायबेल और कहीं मोगरा. In the Persian language, again Sadi said, attar ruh bud sanayi do chashme u ma aspaye sanayi o attar hamdim. Attar is the Persian poet also, and this Rumi said the couplet. Another Urdu and Hindi poetry, a lot of couplets and shares in the favor of fragrance or itr. Zebe kanar itr wo malkar हुए थे शब अब तक महक रही है हमारी बगल तमाम. ये लखनऊ है और आशिक और उसका गुल का हमारा टॉपिक है. आतश का शेर है, ये 2 गज़ला है, उसी का शेर है कि ज़ेबे कनार इत्र वो मलकर हुए थे शब अब तक महक रही है हमारी बगल तमाम. तो लखनऊ में तो ज़बानदानी को कहा गया, लखनऊ की ज़बानदानी मशहूर है दुनिया में. लखनऊ में जब हम इसको हिंदुस्तानी ज़बान या उर्दू ज़बान में बोलते हैं, अदा करते हैं इस लफ्ज़ को, तो ये इत्र कहा जाता है. लिखने में अतर है इंग्लिश में ATTAR, लेकिन उर्दू में जब हम हिंदुस्तानी में इसको बोलेंगे तो इत्र बोलेंगे, क्योंकि इसी तरह मिर्ज़ा जाफ़र हुसैन की किताब है, या कदीम लखनऊ की आखिरी बहार लें, या रजब अली बेग सुरूर की फसाने अजायब ले लें, उसमें भी इस तरह की खुशबू का जिक्र आता है कि लखनऊ की जो खुशबू है इस तरह. और उससे पहले अगर जाएं तो दास्तान अमीर हमज़ा में भी कहीं ना कहीं इसका जिक्र आ जाता है. जब हमारा यार अपना पिटारा खोलता है और एक जादू शुरू करता है अय्यारी का, तो खुशबू सुलगाई जाती है. लोबान वगैरह का भी जिक्र इस तरह मिल जाता है हमको लिटरेचर में. तो इत्र का टॉपिक जो है वो बहुत अच्छा है, बहुत ही ज़बरदस्त है. थैंक यू सो मच. और परवीन शाकिर, क्योंकि आप लोग लेडी हैं, परवीन शाकिर का शेर है, खुशबू बता रही है कि वो रास्ते में है, मौजे हवा के हाथ में उसका सुराग है. शुक्रिया. थैंक यू.
बहुत अच्छा. थैंक यू सो मच. Aditi wants to ask.
Best way to wear itr. You know, often when you go to buy itr, they'll tell you that, you know, you still soak a ball of cotton wool and you just tuck it in behind your ear. They still advise you to do that. However, you know, for French perfume, for instance, you know, you apply it at those pulse spots. So, is there a difference in the way you apply it?
I mean, you're right that a lot of people will still recommend you use it like that, but there are a few different ways you can use it actually, and I also use it in a few different ways. So one definitely is to apply it to the pulse points, you know, like the wrist and behind the ear. The other is once I've done it on my wrists like this, you actually can sort of gently put it on your clothes. Not directly, of course, because it can stain them, but it is actually quite nice on the clothes. I've met people, like older people, you know, from previous generations who are still using attar, and the way they do it is actually before they put on, you know, the outer layer, they'll actually put it on their body. So they'll do the same, the pulse points, and then actually put it on their body and then wear the clothes on top of that. So there are a few different ways actually you can wear it like that. I personally like it on the skin. I don't use the cotton ball so much, but I can see how it's effective because it keeps it, I guess it doesn't evaporate quite as quickly. But yeah, I personally use it on the skin. But one thing I would say actually, if you're talking about the natural attars, then some of them actually can irritate your skin if you use them undiluted, right? So motia is one of those. For some people, it can actually develop into an irritation. So I dilute them. I would never use them undiluted on my skin. And I use something like jojoba oil, almond oil, something like that, because I like to wear them often. If you're not wearing it often, it's not a problem. But if you wear them every day, then actually that is one of the things I would also say. Yeah.
And I think also, you know, like for like us, like if you have a little cotton tucked in and we keep, you know, playing with our hair, it's just going to be very cumbersome, right? The cotton keeps falling. Yeah. Yeah, I think pulse points is, yeah.
No.
Oh yeah, the cotton, yeah. My grandfather used to do that. And I still have a very distinct memory of his morning ritual. You know, that box would come, he would select, and then he would just put one little thing. Yeah.
No, you're right, you can't. You can't
short
really see
hair.
it.
Like long hair, you know, you just, keep playing, yeah.
Actually, I also saw this interesting example of how attar was used, right? It was an old ring. So I was at a jeweler, one of these old court jewelers that's been around for hundreds of years, and they showed me this piece of jewelry. It was a ring that had the band, and then it was like a rose shape. So the stone had been made into what looked like a rose, and it had tiny holes in it. And you could unscrew that rose top from the band, and there was a hole in the back. So you would actually put this cotton ball, or, you know, attar-soaked cotton ball inside the rose, screw it back on, and then you could smell it.
Smelling.
Yeah. Exactly. No, exactly. After about 10 minutes, you can't tell. That's right. That's right. But this is very much for yourself, you know, like if you can buy one of these rose rings. I think it's a great idea too. Someone should make it now. Yeah.
That the 95% of the ethers that we found now are synthetic, right? And that the ones that are made from natural distillation and all those processes are getting less and less. So what trend do you see in particular about this? And you said that a couple of new companies are propping up that are using attars in a more traditional way. Do you think that there would be more of this natural distillation of attars going forward? Or is it the industry going to be more synthetic?
That's a nice question.
Yeah. So the thing is, I don't actually think the... you know, so some people, like if you look at any popular news stories on this industry, a lot of people will say the attar industry is dying. I don't actually personally think that's true. I think it's changing, and I think it's adapting to challenges, yes, and it's changing, but I don't think it's dying. So natural attar distillation is happening. It's just very hard for a retail consumer to find it. So a lot of it is ending up, like I said, in tobacco. A lot of it is ending up overseas, as you mentioned. So it is being produced. It's just not available for you to buy in a shop so easily. So this is where these new companies that are coming up, and they are making a perfume and they are sourcing their attars, and if they're doing that well, then you can buy their product and they will be using natural attars, right? So that is how the retail consumer can now probably access it, because it's too challenging to go and find the right manufacturer, to find the right retail. At the moment, it's very challenging. So I think that's how it's going to become more accessible in the market. Did that answer your question, or was there something I missed?
Yeah.
That was it? Yeah, okay.
And also you were mentioning yesterday that a lot of companies are being transparent now. You know, they're inviting people and showing. So
Yeah,
yeah, that
some
also
are.
sort of instills confidence in...
That's true.
Yeah.
Some are actually doing that. Some of these newer companies that are coming up are being a little more transparent about the ingredients they use and how they make their products. Yeah. I'm sorry, there's a question at the back. I think you had your hand up for a while there, if you don't mind. Yeah, go for it.
I was wondering if there's some sort of a relationship between marking out the elite and how it was used. Because it's mentioned in a lot of places, but clearly it was only accessible to very, very few people. And I'm wondering if there's also a way to kind of distinguish between who was elite and who was not. And what does caste have to do with that? Also in terms of who is making the attar, because oftentimes you see that a lot of these products that were used by the elites were often made by those who would never be able to afford them. I'm just wondering if there's anything that we know about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said at the beginning, this kind of perfumery was an elite type of perfumery for sure. Whether people used these products in a way that distinguished them from others, I don't know. I haven't seen examples of that. Like textual evidence of that. Having said that, this actually is how French perfumery evolved, though. It was very much class-based. It came up in the 1800s, and actually wearing different kinds of scents did tell a person which class you were from. And even today, if you think about it, we use language like, oh, that smells like a cheap perfume. Yeah. Right? That's a very classist language. So that is all there. But whether attar was used like this, I don't know, because we didn't have cheap attars until recently. Until you had this proliferation of synthetics, there was no such thing as a cheap attar. So I don't know historically if that's true. But to your point about caste and about this industry, so part of the reason why I'm doing my research on the entire industry is exactly to bring in this point, right? Because if you look at the historical evidence, it is all on elite perfumery. It is all on who was buying this or who was using this and how it was being used and in what environment it was being used, and all of this is elite. So we can't go back in history and change those documents, right? But if we're looking at the contemporary context, which I am, I can do it differently. So I'm looking at the life cycle, right? So I'm looking at the farmers, the potters who make the kulhars for mitti, for example, the distillers, as well as the manufacturing businesses, the retail businesses, to exactly see what is the relationship between all these different people, whose labor, whose bodies actually make these incredibly elite products, and what does all of that mean? Yeah.
Perhaps a very stupid question, but are there any tips and tricks to figure out, like when you're out buying ittar in the market, like what is a natural ittar, what is a synthetic ittar, or like what's a good quality one or a bad quality one?
Yeah.
And is it completely dependent on price points, like an expensive one would be better?
Yeah, that's a good question. We discussed this before, and I was like, I don't have a satisfying answer for you because it's so hard to know if you haven't experienced it. I mean, there are a few little things you could definitely look for. So, for example, if we're talking about the natural attars, right, there's a limited number of what they are. Khas, mitti, gulab, chameli, motia, whatever, right? Like there's a limited number of what will be there. So if what you are being sold is not one of these things, then already you can say probably it's not a naturally derived attar, right? So that's one thing. The next thing, yes, price plays a part, right? If it's inexpensive, if it's too cheap, there's no way it's going to be natural again, right? Having said that, of course, somebody can sell a synthetic attar at a high price. So you won't know in that case. Everything that is expensive won't be good. I wish I had a better answer for you. Honestly, I wish I did. I don't know how I can...
I like the virus, analogy you gave yesterday.
Which one?
You know how the computer virus, like you think you've,
yes.
and then there's another virus.
Yeah. So I was talking. Yeah, exactly. You can tell me. I don't know, but yeah, it's adulteration is a big issue in this industry, and the way that people adulterate is constantly changing. So the testing for it is always behind. So there's actually there's no guaranteed way you can know 100% for sure what is in the product you are buying, actually. And this is, if you ask me, one of the greatest challenges in this industry is the lack of trust and accountability in terms of what you're buying. And this is true whether we talk about domestic commercial buyers, whether we talk about domestic retail buyers, and whether we talk about international buyers. Everybody will say, I don't trust who I'm buying from. And that's a very sad state of affairs. After 10 years, even I would say, on one hand, I can count the number of businesses I trust.
Yeah. Maybe no one can choose that trust.
That's the idea. That's the idea.
But that's the thing with almost everything today, be it handcrafted textiles or organic food, it's very hard to tell what's genuine.
That's true.
And that's why, like you mentioned, that so many makers are now being transparent and they're inviting people that this approach is coming from the whole sustainability and slow living movement where people really want to know what businesses are really doing and what they are being sold.
No, I agree.
Transparency.
Yeah, so Giti, I was just wondering, maybe in your conversation, maybe there was this line of answer for the gentleman wherein you said that the natural fragrances will not be replicated. So roses from one garden one season may not be replicated. So if I'm just thinking aloud that maybe if I am, buying a attar from, say, in 2024, if the attar smells exactly like that in 2025 and then 2026, that means it's not a natural one.
Then you'll have to wait for 3 years.
No, that is like if there is a class distinguished, then if somebody buys it 3 times within 2024, I won't be able to afford it more than once in a year. Yeah.
I mean, the difficulty, I mean, maybe that's true, but I think the other thing is that some of these differences are quite subtle, and we all may not be able to discern them. Yeah, so it may smell the same to a lot of us, but actually maybe somebody with a very sharp nose would be able to say it's actually a little different.
Yes.
Yeah, so I wouldn't trust that necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Giti, we have wine tasters.
Yes.
We should have these,
We do. We have noses.
I know, they are there, but not in India. So we should have this as a profession. We should introduce them in the universities and all.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay. Do you have a question? Any other question? Yes. Some poetry? Yes.
Boo means, boo means in Persian means good, means smell, good smell. Khushboo, good smell, then badboo, bad smell. It's very important. बूए गुल में आयत गुलाब की खुशबू आ रही है और बूए बद में आयत गंदी बदबू आ रही है यानी बदबू आ रही है. That means. Okay.
Thank you. So, any other questions, or we can wrap the session? Thank you so much, Giti. It was so insightful, and I think it was one of a very enlightening session. We had a great time, and amazing audience also. Thank you all so much for taking the time out. Thank you, Giti.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.